Hello model railroaders, my name's Dave. Welcome back to the layout. Well, I believe I'm just about done cutting all the foam for the logging run, so let's give you an overview of where we're at. As you can see, I was able to incorporate the trestle bridge from my previous layout in a good enough location. And looking down, I did have to cut into that plateau there to provide enough of a run from where the trestle bridge ends to be able to park 6 and maybe squeeze in a 7th logging car. And of course there's still more contouring that needs to be done as far as to making the scene look good and filling in holes and digging out more holes for the ravine and plaster work and stuff. But right now I'm just focusing on getting it to the point where I know where the track's going. So I will have to cut that out, and at the end of the video before I sign off, we'll talk about foam cutters. But I just want to give you an overview of where the progress is. So that's our 6-foot section, and then we slide down to our 5-inch. Did I say 6 feet? The 6-inch high foam riser down the incline to the 5-inch height, and then of course the same distance from the turnout to be able to back the whole train down there as it would be from here to the end of the riser there. And then we're following down the foam riser as we progress down the layout. This is a 2.5-inch level. Now, to make life easy, you don't want to start notching out an incline. So at the 2.5-inch point, I kept it at that 2.5-inch height all the way around the curve till we're back to a straight section. Now, this caught me off guard. I need a 2-inch height to essentially create a tunnel for the main line. That purchased states that it's 1/2 inch, but it's about 1/2 inch and maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch, because this is a true 2.5 inch and that's a little over. So for the track that will span this, the lower track, the ceiling of the tunnel if you will, I'm going to actually have to router out a 1/16 of an inch of foam to make that transition and keep my 2.5-inch height, because of course I can't just chop some off the bottom here, because that will lower the height, and then I may have a height issue with the train locomotives and or any of the cars actually gaining access through that tunnel portal. So minor thing, but it's something that can't be really sanded. Just for consistency, I'm going to have to route it out. I ended up using solid foam, as you can see, instead of the Woodland Scenics foam. Now, that's a personal preference. I find this foam, though, would work great. It is a little wide in that dimension for me. Like, it may be great for HO, but for N, I just have an issue with that. A secondary thing is you need to really put plaster cloth over this before you lay the track. Now, in keeping with the modular aspect of the layout, I decided I don't really want to be chopping up my nice 8-foot long foam risers. I'm actually going to make them removable. So all of the foam down that end I'm going to end up bonding together, and then I'm actually going to figure out, I've got a couple options, and we'll talk about that in future videos as I get to that point, of just fixing the foam to the surface of the plywood using a mechanical means rather than an adhesive means. That way, pardon me, if I ever have to remove the split the layout up into its individual sections, say to deal with the piping in the bulkhead, that I can just lift the whole foam section off and set it aside and kind of keep it intact as much as possible. So that's part of the reason why I didn't use the Woodland Scenics risers, but actually ended up cutting them up into, this is a 3-degree section, so I think it's called barrel staves, possibly, where you've got the wider outside diameter and a narrow, wider outside length compared to a narrower inside length, so that you actually get the curve like a barrel. So what I ended up doing was taking some scrap, making 2.5, 3, and 3.5 inch little templates out of the scrap foam, and then laying them down to see what would work to hit my dimension of my offset of the track there. So in this case, because we're doing a crossover of the main line and not just an inside curve following another curve, I had to mix them up a bit, where I've got 3 and 3.5 degree cuts on those staves to be able to make the joint to continue from the 2.5 inch down to the 2 inch riser or incline, and then from 2 inches around that curve there that we'll walk around and look at in a moment, and picking up that 2 inch and then taking it down to a 1/2 inch, where I'll show you how kind of close my estimate was of where it may end up. So I did all of that cutting. Sorry, I was just didn't want to forget to mention that a friend of mine, thank you Mark, loaned me his bandsaw, and I was able to cut all the foam once I got it into the rough dimension that I wanted it. I was able to do all that cutting on the bandsaw, which gives a lot more cleaner cut than with a knife or even hot wire. Now, I did mention about hot wire, and here is a Woodland Scenics hot wire. It uses, I believe it's called Canthal wire. You can see the shine there. Very, very thin wire. Now, it's only that wire that will heat up, kind of like the tungsten filament in an incandescent light bulb. Though it will burn you, and if you put enough voltage through it, it will actually start glowing as hot metal does. But normally it doesn't get to the point of glowing, and it'll give you a fairly good foam cut. For doing more sculpting work, the Tippy hot wire foam cutter is kind of a more beefed up, where it is using a heavier gauge of wire, and it's more set up that as you can see, there's 2 tips here that you can bend the wire into different shapes to actually knock divots or dig divots into the foam, and that's the more, as far as a hot tool, you have hot knives, and then you've got I guess it's more of a rod shaped cutters as well, but for my purposes for cutting this kind of foam, that was sufficient for whatever I need to do. Now, I do want to, if you do use these cutters, be aware that this foam, this pink stuff and this white stuff, is not manufactured for the hobbyist for using hot cutters on. It will evolve toxic gases. You do need to do this in a well-ventilated area. Even just making a couple cuts, I could smell the odor of the burnt slash melted foam in the upper level of the condo. So, you know, you really need to be careful. You may not realize it, but then you start getting a headache, and it's all essentially this toxic gas that's evolving off. So on the opposite side, we come down through the curve and back into the other curve, and then continue down our incline down to a 1/2 inch level. Now, my plan is to use the 1/2 inch foam and actually have a back section of this upper layout on a foam riser. Now, I did pick up a 2 foot by 8 foot sheet, which I notched the corner out there for that other purpose. And I like the idea of getting rid of the one level plywood and adding some vertical dimension. And I want to try that as well. I want to, for some of the buildings that may be on the spur line, I want to set the buildings on the foam, but have the foam underneath or the building attached to the foam, but the foam not attached to the layout, so that I could remove that building and insert a different building with the same sized foam base back in, so I can change my industries out on the for that spur line, just to change things out, so to prevent things from getting stale, and provide different load placement or card delivery opportunities eventually when I do get to running an operational timetable. So I do want to work in that aspect of flexibility to the layout. Now, if you are not aware, Model Railroad Hobbyist magazine, it is a free online only magazine. Model Railroad Hobbyist.com is the website. You do not need to log in, though if you do want to create a user account, it is free. By logging into a user account, it does give you bonuses, and you can interact in the forum there. Ken Patterson, who is one of the presenters within the magazine, a lot of the foam techniques that I'm using has come from him. He does everything. His whole layout is built on a foam base, which sits on a removable foam base, which sits on a plywood type structure. So it's really interesting. So definitely check out Model Railroad Hobbyist magazine, because it's free. Can't get better than that. Good content, and don't have to pay for it. As well as click on the link within the magazine to the What's Neat with Ken Patterson. And Ken Patterson also has his own YouTube channel where he does a What's Neat This Week podcast. And there was an audio-only podcast in the past. Now they actually do a video podcast for about the last 4 months or so, I believe. And it's really worthwhile checking it out. So I can't recommend it. If I can remember when I post the video, I'll put both links down in the description so that you can quick link over to both places. So at this, I'm now needing to join all this foam together, and I'm going to try the great stuff that Ken Patterson suggests. So we'll see how that goes. So At this point, we'll say bye for now and see you on the next video.